Welcome to this episode of the Financial Incline. I'm your host, John Bovard. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Ely Friedman. Ely is the Director of Mergers and Acquisitions for VonLehman and Company. Ely focuses on working in the lower middle market by providing advisory services to companies that range from $5 million to $100 million in revenue or $1 to $10 million worth of EBITDA. His group offers both sell-side and buy-side advisory services. During our conversation, we discuss where Ely starts when he engages with a new client that is looking to sell their business. We also discuss how Ely helps that business owner determine the value of their company, and he shares with us ways that he has been able to increase the enterprise value of that business prior to going through the sale. Lastly, we discuss what types of buyers he has seen that have had the most success in completing a transaction. So if you are a business owner that is potentially looking to sell your business and you're curious on where to start, make sure you check out my conversation with Ely Friedman. Hey, Ely, how's it going?
Good to see you, John. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hoping we get some warmer weather here this week. It's a little late in March to be this cold outside.
It is. I'm ready for the summer festivities to begin.
Yes, absolutely. So, we appreciate everybody that's watching and listening in. Ely, obviously I kind of went through a brief introduction, just letting everyone know who you are, but in your own words, would you mind sharing a little bit of background about yourself and what you do today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up on a small family farm in middle of nowhere, Kentucky. I was fortunate enough to play a couple of sports in college in Charlotte, North Carolina. And that's where I spent the first decade of my career and where I had met my now business partner, Keith Carlson, who founded the M&A practice here within VonLehman. And when I had landed in investment banking in Charlotte, he was also living in Charlotte at the time. And we were talking about M&A transactions and how excited he was about starting the group within VonLehman here in Cincinnati. And it's been a huge blessing to my family. I mean, just a great place to raise my daughter and start a new chapter in our careers.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how do things compare to where you're at now in Cincinnati to growing up?
It's very different. I don't miss the hard manual labor at all. This is a different kind of hard manual labor, but it's really enjoyable to work with these founder, privately held companies and helping them sell their businesses or honestly grow their company through making acquisitions and buying other smaller competitors. It's really transformational. So it's a lot of fun.
Yes, that is. I enjoy that as well. I love working with business owners. So what does your typical client look like?
Yeah, so our clients are 100% referrals from wonderful folks like yourself in wealth management or attorneys, accountants, wherever they may come. And so because of that, I really lean into situations more than an ideal profile. I always hate when folks try to put business owners in this perfect box, and that's just not the case, right? And so for me, if there's a known buyer and a known seller, and I'm being the mediator and trying to help the two parties on valuations and deal structures and things like that, irrespective of size, I'm always happy to help. There's plenty of instances where business owners come to me and they have an unsolicited offer, or they have at least somebody that's breathing down their neck, hey, I really want to buy your business, etc. And those are more one-off situations that we tailor our scope of work and our fees, candidly. Yep. But in large part, a lot of what we do is a full broad auctions sell-side service to business owners where we're helping sell their company from start to finish. And that means building a confidential investment memorandum or a SIM. It means identifying and targeting and going out to a lot of good qualified prospective buyers who have done deals and know how this game is played. And it means holding their hand through the due diligence and execution part of a transaction, which is, never fun for anybody, the diligence period. but it's a necessary evil, and we negotiate things like networking capital, et cetera. And for that full suite of services, and the buyer universe that I have, within my Rolodex for doing this over a decade, is geared best towards companies that are somewhere between 2 and 20 million of EBITDA,
Okay.
or somewhere approximately 10 to 250 million in sales.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Those are great metrics. And, from everything I've seen, that process you described, start to finish of the sim and finding buyers and going through, the due diligence process. So those are great services, obviously very valuable. I've heard the expression of people saying you wouldn't marry the first woman you ever dated at times, or you wouldn't marry the first man you ever dated, whatever that might be. Or if you're shopping for cars, it's normally not the first car or house you buy. So that process of finding buyers and how involved do you get there? Are you sourcing them, and then after that part, do you kind of have your list of people that you normally look at? How do you go about finding some of those buyers?
Absolutely. And listen, every business owner is an expert in their respective field. They have their own contacts. And so I really think of my buyers list as a very collaborative efforts. There's some industry participants that business owners are going to have an existing relationship with,
Yep.
and they've had previous conversations with, and they really enjoy those business owners and respect them and like their company culture, et cetera. And it's really my job to help flush out whether or not that buyer is willing to, get to agreeable terms with a seller, and coming up to a higher valuation and coming up with the appropriate terms that's attractive to the seller. But
Yep.
listen, I'm in this industry. I've been in this industry. There are thousands of private equity buyers out there. There are tens of thousands of strategic buyers that are out there. And they're calling investment bankers like me every single day, dying to get in front of the right business owner to buy their next business. And
Mhm.
so because of that, I'm constantly talking with buyers across a lot of different industries. But when I have a new client, irrespective of whether or not I've been in that industry before, is I like to close the doors, get into a cave of thought, and I really want to critically go through all the contacts that logically make sense for that particular industry. Folks
Yep.
that have been acquisitive recently, folks that have experience in that industry, folks that have demonstrated or communicated that they want to get in that particular part of the country, or whatever the case may be. I have a real investment thesis behind each and every one of my buyers. And I spend a ton of time doing so, knowing that when it comes time to putting pen to paper, there's a lot of buyers out there that say that they're interested until they're not. And so
Yep.
for
Yep.
me, I'm most wanting buyers that are willing to put forth offers. And that's
Yep.
why on the vast majority of my engagements, we have multiple offers for the businesses that I'm selling.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. Well, great. So, Eli, just to take a maybe, one step back. So, let's say just kind of like a case study example. If a client engages you, where do you typically start with them? So, maybe it's a business owner. If you have, a recent example, where does that process normally start?
Sure. So it starts with their center of influence, right? You being a perfect example of that, a trusted wealth advisor. I'd be curious to know some things on your side as well. But for me, the start really comes from the referral, and that could be a past client or a center of influence type like yourself in the wealth management community that brings me an introduction that says, "Hey, here's a business owner, 60 years old, 50 years old, really thinking about their next stage in life. It could be their youngest kid just graduated from university.
Mhm.
It could be they've reached that next milestone in their business. Hey, I achieved 50 million in sales, whatever the case may be.
Yep.
There's some kind of impetus for them to want to explore a potential sale to an outside party or internal management. And
Mhm.
so that's the start of our conversation and relationship with clients.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. So there's, like you said, there's some sort of catalyst that's out there. What I've seen as well, maybe it's might be unfortunately maybe a health issue. Maybe they're just getting up in age and they're ready to retire, and there's no clear successor to the business. Or like you said, maybe sometimes it's just an offer that they can't refuse, right? It's something that that came through, and it was they weren't necessarily planning on selling at that time, or maybe they're a couple of years out and they get something that comes across their desk that it could be life changing, right? So great. So you get that that introduction happens. They start with your team. What are some of the things that you're now outlining, with your client?
Yeah, so by function of how investment bankers are compensated, I don't know how well versed your audience is, but investment bankers traditionally get paid some amount of small nominal monthly retainer, but really our success fee at the end is how we're all making money in this industry. I don't participate in going out to market and trying to be a part of a business transaction if I don't have a high degree of confidence in that eventual closing, because candidly, that's how I get paid and that's how my clients get paid. And
Yep.
so as a result of that, on the front end, what I am doing is I'm doing a ton of internal due diligence on that client of mine. And I'm really trying to put my buyer's hat on, because I've bought, many businesses. I've represented a lot of different buyers in their view of those businesses. And I'm scrutinizing, their financials. I'm scrutinizing their operational management team. I'm scrutinizing, their legal contracts, and I'm trying to see, what is the visibility into the near and long term future of the company, because that's exactly what every buyer is going to be very inquisitive of. And we want to make sure that we're in a good understanding of what the business does, how it fits within their industry, et cetera, how they benchmark to their competitors, because that's ultimately what we are going to use for that confidential investment memorandum or the marketing material. That
Mm-hmm.
could be, 75 plus pages, which is going to act like a playbook to those prospective buyers. And
Yep.
so on the front end, we're doing all this internal diligence, and I'm also starting to bring in the rest of the deal team. So I'm bringing in the accountants, I'm bringing in the insurance, I'm bringing in the attorneys, bringing in the wealth. And one of the things that I always find tremendously valuable is when on that initial diligence, internal diligence, I'm trying to give my gauge of valuation to my client so that their expectations are known and set. And I like to deliver that back to you, the wealth advisor, to say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, is this enough? And so I'd be curious to know what your train of thought is, when somebody says, "Hey, I got this offer. Is this going to be enough for me?"
Right, right. Yeah, that's a great question, and something that is for the business owners that clients that I've worked with. The good thing is the majority of them are good savers, right? I mean, typically, just in general, you might run into someone that says, "Yeah, I'm not really going to save a lot towards retirement. My business is my retirement plan." Right? They're kind of looking at, "Hey, here's this token that I can cash in, and it's going to alleviate all of my retirement planning worries." Unfortunately, the people that use that, they often end up selling and then finding another job or finding a part-time job or wanting to go back and work for the company that they just sold. So, it's very important to outline up front and be very clear with all my business owner clients that you've got to be putting money away. Not only does it help you from a tax perspective by lowering your taxable income and deferring taxes that you pay on those retirement accounts, but then it's also building that nest egg up for you to give you that flexibility and that freedom to where now it's not a fire sale or an emergency that you're selling your business. Now it's almost like the cherry on top. And that's something that can last you for generations. So it's obviously very important to have a clear cut and a sound retirement plan in place. And then before we get into the discussion of, what is enough, it's more important to know how will you be spending your time and really then laying out, okay, what does the next 18 to 24 months look like for you? Then from there, okay, 2 to 5 years. What are we thinking from that perspective? 5 to 8 years, and then 8+ years. How are we, first and foremost, how are you going to spend your time? Kind of having an outline for that is in my mind, it's harder. It's a harder conversation to have than just simply running the numbers and doing the math on here's what you spend, here's what you have, here's how many years that'll last you. So it's really important to sit down, meet with clients. How are you going to spend your time? Where do you currently sit today? And then with this windfall, how much are you going to net? And then from there, okay, now we can start to bucket out your money to your short term, your intermediate term, and your long term buckets of money that are determined by your time horizon and determined by how aggressive we can be with these funds. Shorter term, more conservative; longer term, a little bit more aggressive. So,
And I use all of that. I use all of
yep,
that feedback from folks like you. I use all that feedback from my clients that help frame the discussion with buyers, and that crafts the story as to what we want to describe to them as the life after the deal. And so
yep,
in my marketing phase, so the first phase is obviously the internal diligence, assessing the value of the company, working with centers of influence, working with critical deal parties like an experienced M&A attorney, et cetera.
yep.
And then for me, during that phase two of actually marketing and having those conversations with buyers, I'm taking all that learned knowledge from that first phase and I'm deploying that in my conversations with buyers in that second phase to really maximize value and achieve whatever those shareholder goals. To your point, it could be maintaining a role in the business. Maybe it's on the board, maybe it's consultative,
Yep.
maybe it's full time and you want to keep running that organization, but you just happen to want to take some chips off the table and take some money out of the company to satisfy your wealth planning needs and securing some finances for your family.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Great. And one of the things you brought up that I wanted to touch on, because it seems like it could be maybe a point of contention, is how do you typically go about determining the value of the company?
Yeah, it's a great question, and fortunately, in my world, the value is always in the eyes of the beholder, right? And so there is an academia formulated models that you can run. And listen, at VonLehman, we've got great dedicated valuation specialists that have all the designations. And I think Brian Setz over there does a great job for what the purpose is. But
Mhm.
in our M&A world, when I'm selling a company or I'm helping somebody buy a company, that value is not formulaic, right?
Right.
There's certainly a sense and a feel. It's a mix between an art and a science.
Mhm.
And you certainly don't want to overextend yourself and make promises in terms of how much you're willing to pay for because you don't have the cash to back it up. And listen, right now the banking community is a little rocked with some of the bank closures and bank trades that have happened within the past week. And so it's really important that the value that you're putting on the business, it makes sense. It makes sense from a
Mhm.
lending perspective. It makes sense from an operational perspective. It makes sense from just a cash flow perspective. And
Right.
so, fortunately for me, because I live and breathe this business every single day and I'm working on these private transactions, I'm aware of a lot of these private deals that get done. And I have a good sense and a feel for how these deals are trading in terms of their multiples of revenue or multiples of EBITDA. And
Yeah.
these financials, these comparative transactions, oftentimes and most oftentimes are not disclosed publicly.
Right.
And so it is through my extensive network of buyers across a lot of different industries where if I haven't worked in that particular industry, it's very easy for me to phone a friend who has a ton of experience in that particular industry and to say, hey, what are you seeing on deals of this size? What are you seeing on deals in this industry? And I'm able to triangulate the financial models, the publicly available comparative transactions, and also the privately help businesses and their financials that are not disclosed. I'm able to triangulate those three things in addition to my own financial models, a leverage buyout model and a discount cash flow model, LBO model and DCF,
Yep.
to give at least a guidance on what I believe that value of the company is. And that's all it is. It's strictly guidance, and I am highly incentivized to get the most amount of money when I'm selling a business.
Right.
And so we're very well aligned with the business owner and trying to achieve that. But I also, again, in phase one, I need to set the expectation very realistic with my sellers that this is where I believe the guidance of value is going to be. And if we're able to get that guidance, if we're able to get that value, upon closing, then we all need to be confident and comfortable that that's acceptable. Because if it's not, we're just wasting our time.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I'm sure that this scenario has happened with your clients where they've come to you with, hey, I've got this, like you said, an unsolicited offer, and it is, X amount of dollars. And then you are able to get them a significantly higher price. So how does that happen? How have you been able to do that for your clients, in the past?
Yeah, there's lots of different examples here. We've done it most recently for Turnkey Technologies that recently closed last month. He had an offer previously. I gave that valuation guidance that was significantly higher. That buyer had no reason to pay top dollar because there was no competition. There were no other buyers that they were aware of making an offer.
Right.
And so, without an investment banker like myself to create that competitive tension with buyers, oftentimes they're just not going to put their best foot forward. We also spend a ton of time in that first phase diligencing the company to try to assess and determine if there's any one-time add backs that we can add to the net income of a business. And there's lots of adjustments, right? So the big easy ones, have there been any lawsuits or any legal expenses that are one-time in nature? Have there been any major upgrades in equipment? Maybe it's technology, maybe it's machines, whatever the case may be. During COVID, we were very liberal in adding back all of these wonderful things of, hey, if COVID wasn't here, the business would be generating way more profit. During, call it 2021 and the first part of 2022, there was inflation, right? And so we were able to say, hey, pricing is temporarily high, but it's coming back down, right? And because of that, we get some credit for it. There's times where maybe you're employing business employees that you don't necessarily need to be employing. There's wives and spouses and employees that should have retired 5 years ago, and just because you're a nice person, you never took them off the payroll.
Right.
A lot of these types of things justifiably are reasons why you can add those expenses to net income. And so during that first phase, we are working very closely with the accountants, the CFOs, controllers, the business owners to try to identify some of those things to really increase the net income, or really the EBITDA of a business. And we're using that as the starting place in our negotiations with prospective buyers.
Yes. Okay. Great. And has there, somewhat to the opposite effect, if someone comes to you and maybe they have an unsolicited offer, maybe they just have a number in their head, what has led to maybe their value, the value of the business, or that perceived purchase price? What has led to some decreases in that? Is there anything that really jumps out at you that can kind of be a red flag for someone that might be preparing to sell their business?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of them. I would say the big ones are, listen, mistakes happen.
Yep.
Clerical errors happen. You may have a really talented finance function, but it only takes one mistake, one fat finger of an invoice that you had as revenue, but you accidentally booked it twice, right? Or maybe it was an expense that you forgot to you forgot to hit submit on, or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
And these things, while it may seem small, they can happen at scale as well.
Right.
And so if one of your big customers has a couple $100,000 project, and you accidentally double book that project and you don't catch it, a buyer will catch it. I can assure you, the buyers, they will spend, call it $60,000 to $150,000 in the first 2 weeks of a transaction to do what's called a quality of earnings, which is a mini audit that is rifle in their scope and approach on reviewing the transactions within the business. And they will uncover things like that. They will uncover mistakes, just clerical errors. And because of that, your purchase price is going to likely be reduced. And it's likely going to be reduced not just by the amount that the error was on, but it's the amount times the purchase price multiple for which you're getting on your EBITDA. And so it can be substantial. Other big items happen all the time as well. Unknown risks that come up after you sign a letter of intent. If there's a big outstanding tax liability that buyers just cannot get comfortable with, and that is a bill that you need to pay as the seller, that's something that I routinely negotiate. But that's another big component that can potentially reduce purchase price. Mm-hmm. Another common one would be net working capital. There's a lot of business owners that don't understand the art in coming up with that calculation, the negotiating topics within the time period, within the particular accounts that are being used, the adjustments within the net working capital. And so that can, and oftentimes does, lead to a negative purchase price adjustment if it's not appropriately accounted for and described in our deals.
Yeah. I've seen that as well. I know net working capital can be a pretty big sticking point. Just one, figuring out how to determine it and come up with a number and length of time and everything else, and then two, kind of the drastic impact that can have on the purchase price. It can really determine the outcome for a lot of deals. So, well, great. So then, kind of looking at it from a buyer's perspective now, who have you seen? So of the transactions you've done representing your clients and selling their business, what types of buyers have you seen that have had the most success?
Yeah, so we tailor our buyer pool depending on the shareholder goals and objectives. So if you're a business owner and you're about to retire, you candidly don't care who the buyer is. You're most likely wanting to get top dollar for the business. You're most likely want to just make sure that your employees have a job. They're going to get paid the same or more, ideally, right? And so because of that reason, we may include private equity as potential buyers, and we may include strategic buyers as potential buyers for a business owner that's wanting to retire. There's also some clients that I have that are just adamant. I hate private equity. I don't care who it is. I just refuse. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's not my place. I try to educate them the pros and cons of both buyer types, financial and strategic. And for those that are just adamant, I do not want to include private equity as a potential buyer for me, I don't include them. And we simply focus on the strategic buyers. I also have the same thing happen with business owners that say, I hate all the strategics in my industry. They're all, out to take every nickel. I've been competing against them for years. I've been bad-mouthing them to all of my customers. If my customers found out that I was selling to a competitor, they'd say, what are you thinking? You've been saying bad things about these guys, competing with them for years. And so for that reason, we don't include them, right? And so we may have more private equity buyers that we're including in our potential buyer pool.
Yeah. Well, great. So for anyone listening that may be looking to acquire a business, what are some things that they could do that would make them an attractive buyer? Is it, I obviously understand that financing is a big part of it. If you have a great great balance sheet, if you have a lot of capital that you could work with and great relationships with a bank. So what would make them stand out, as a buyer, or, someone that's interested in buying businesses? What should they kind of have lined up?
Experience. Experience is the number one thing where you don't want to be somebody's first, right? We all had to be somebody's first. Everybody had a first. I had a first.
Yep.
It wasn't pretty. It wasn't good. It's never going to end well. You have to have experience in doing transactions. And for the buyers out there that don't have experience, that's what I'm here for, right? That's what investment bankers are here for. We're here to give you that experience so that you're not making the mistakes that people have done before.
Yep.
When I'm filtering through different types of buyers, whether they're private equity or strategic, I'm saying who's done deals, who has actually been successful in acquiring this type of asset and integrating them in whatever that looks like. And if they don't have that track record, that's a immediate red flag for me to say, we've got a real risk here. If we were to sign a letter of intent at a certain purchase price, there's a legitimate risk that they may try to reduce the purchase price because they're not experienced. There may be a legitimate risk that they're not going to be able to integrate my employees, and it's a complete headache and a mess. And instead of the deal getting done in maybe 60 or 90 days, it's taking 120, even longer, because they're just so inexperienced in doing the transaction. And I can tell you it's very costly for both parties when that happens. It's very disruptive to the business. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is making the timeline within these transactions as short and compressed as possible so that you don't have those additional costs and that you don't have the additional distraction within the business.
Yeah. That's great. That's great advice. Having everything lined up, and I think too, just from the deals that I've done, having quick, responsive attorneys, making sure that they're not holding on to documents for longer than they need to be. They're being very diligent and responsive, can really be an important factor.
Absolutely. And there's different phases within the deal where you just have an internal check within those key leaders on the deal team, right? And so you get that letter of intent. It says a specific value, what that business owner is going to get. Double check with John. Is that going to be enough? Is that the same value or hopefully more than what we originally were discussing in the first phase? Is there any tax planning that we want to do between now and close? Are there any charitable organizations? There's lots of different things that I've seen business owners try to accomplish, and that's the time to lean on folks like you to prepare for some of those. Do you have any silver bullets that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, definitely laying out, what you want your legacy to be, right? I mean, how do you want to be remembered really in your community? I mean, if it's a business that's been around for a long time, that could be a strong part of the community. You could have employees that rely on you, and you could really look to leave a legacy. I mean, I would say, obviously the kind of the quick hit, kind of the easiest one to do that you can set up that really doesn't have a cost to it is a donor advised fund. And that way, the great benefit of the donor advised fund is you can front load your contributions to the donor advised fund. You can get a large tax deduction in the year that you have the exit. And then you can sit and you can be patient and you can wait and see what you really have an interest in, what you really have a passion for, what you would really like to get involved with. So you can make that front-loaded contribution, get the tax deduction in year one, get that right away. And then, like I said, you can spread that out throughout, any of the years that you want to use that. So, for people that are have an inclination to get involved in their community or with a specific charity, I definitely like and recommend looking at the donor advised funds to do that. There's also other ways if you wanted to keep the money, in the family. There's obviously 529 plans, and those can be great. You can get a state tax deduction for those. You can set those up for your kids, your grandkids. But sometimes another kind of a smart way to do it, and to do that, and get sort of somewhat of a tax deduction there, make it easier on your kids. You can pay education bills or medical bills directly to these institutions. You could pay a hospital directly. You could pay a university directly, and there's no limit on that amount that you can gift if you pay the university or if you pay that hospital directly. It can be, kind of an easy way of, getting around any sort of gift tax, and also getting away from any sort of contribution limit that you can make is another thing that you can look at, if you have those things out there as well. So
That's great.
yep. So all right. So Eli, where can people find you? How can they connect with you? If they're looking at buying or selling a business, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Well, my favorite way is doing a workout together, whether that's run or lift or ruck or whatever the case may be, boot camp. But that's just personally. I mean, professionally, absolutely would love to hear from folks. I'm on website VonLehmanVLCPA.com, and then you can always call my cell phone 859-707-7840. Always happy to share insights.
Yes. Well, great. And Eli, I know I've seen you at several different networking events here in Cincinnati. You're very involved with doing that. Gave a great presentation, last time I saw you as well. So, a lot of those different organizations I know you're involved with and have a great presence there.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We've got a lot of more exciting ones to come as well.
Great. All right. Well, I appreciate the time today. Eli, it's always good to hear from you. It was great perspective, and definitely think we learned a lot today. So I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, John.